Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for coming to the Anarchist Transmission podcast this Saturday night. I have five co-hosts today. I've got Dale from, well, not from, but he is our resident Canuckistani. Say hi, Dale.
Hello, everyone, or maybe I should just say hi, Dale. I am, as mentioned, co-host coming to you from the lovely little city of Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and welcome to the show.
And I have Kota, my lovely fiance, who is in the other room today. Say hi, Kota.
Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good weekend.
And we have our resident Serbian. Say hi, Mali.
Molly, your mic is muted.
Shit. Hello, Serbia strong.
And we have our trash panda Luna from the non existent state of Ohio. Say hi, Luna.
Hel- Hello from the dreamscape.
Well, I hope everybody's been having a good week. It's definitely been an interesting one. Um, I scrapped pretty much all of uh, all of everything that we were going to do this week as soon as I found out there was a House Judiciary Committee meeting on Wednesday on ATF Overreach. And it was definitely an interesting one. So tonight's subject is all one thing, and that's the House Judiciary Committee. And the question I'm posing is ATF oversight. How much hypocrisy is too much? And this relates back to a lot of the arguments that the Democrats made during the meeting, talking about how Trump uh, had asked the ATF to go after bump stocks. And the famous line from his meeting with, who was that, Pelosi? Where he said, take the guns first, due process second. That was not a good look for him.
No, it was not.
And so I wanted to get everyone's take on this. And I have the video loaded up. This is the oversight of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives from the House Committee on the Judiciary YouTube channel, which streams every meeting the Judiciary Committee has. It's been an interesting watch ever since I found out about it in 2016. I know Luna had caught the last, what was it, hour and a half?
I'd say probably more like 45 minutes to an hour of it. And even in that little bit that I caught, you could pretty much have summed it up within 15 minutes in the sense that literally nothing had been progressed in like either for or against. Both pretty much both sides just kept going, "Hey, answer my question." And with the representative from the ATF just using typical like prompted things that he's probably been given by his higher ups.
Political platitudes.
So it was very much for at least from what I yeah.
A mix of that and also not knowing anything about guns, firearms, or anything at all.
Well, I honestly, I have to say, Dettelbach isn't the worst we could have had. I know that one of the previous nominees for the position of director of the ATF was a former ATF agent who had been involved in the Waco incident.
Oh, so
Oh,
he.
geez.
I was under the impression that was actually the guy who got the who was the head of. So that guy is not actually head of the ATF.
Well,
The Waco guy.
no, he's not.
Oh.
The guy who was nominated, that was the Waco guy, he actually had a photo op standing atop the burned remains of men, women, and children.
I've
Right.
seen that image. Yeah.
Yep.
That is disgusting. And for anyone and everyone talking about about children being unalived by AR-15s, take a look at the ATF first, because they've done a lot of that.
Yeah. They literally burned down a compound full of children.
And women.
Yes, and women, all in the name of so-called supposedly protecting those women and children whose charred remains are now the fault of this organization.
And yet they are still more famous for shooting dogs in their backyards.
Yes. As well as women. Cough, Ruby Ridge, cough.
Yeah.
Can't forget that one.
No, I'm not gonna forget about Ruby Ridge.
They all had guns.
Yes. And let's not forget about the harrowing things that took place because they took fire from a Barrett sniper rifle, which never happened. So I'm gonna go ahead and start this this video. This is Chairman Jim Jordan, and we'll see how things go down.
Chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. The chair would now ask the gentleman from Texas, Sheriff Nels, if he would lead us in the pledge.
I ask that everyone please join me, stand, honoring our nation's flag.
3, would know something about firearms. Last week in a hearing in front of Congress in the Appropriations Committee, he was asked about firearms. He said, I'm not an expert in firearms. Not an expert, but still trying to run Americans' lives. You would think the head of the agency tasked with regulating the entire firearms industry, a constitutionally protected industry, would know something about firearms.
To be fair, though, this is one of those hypocrisy moments. You are sitting on a committee talking about firearms, and a good majority of the people on that committee, be them Republican or Democrat, have zero knowledge of the inner workings of a firearm.
And a lot of the Republicans, worth noting, a bit off topic, but huge red flag supporters. So they don't have much of a leg to stand on in their vain attempts to pretend they care about the Second Amendment.
Oh, you mean like Dan Crenshaw?
Oh yeah.
He's been called
Dan
out.
McCain Crenshaw.
He's been called out so many times for his hypocrisy. It is important for us to have the Second Amendment, but take guns away.
Yep. Take them first, due process later, as a certain president once said.
Oh, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. That was Trump. It was Trump.
Yeah.
It was Trump. It was Trump.
And I say this as someone who is more warm to Trump than negative. That was indefensible. It was asinine. It was indefensible. Due process first.
Well, you've heard the audio clip of that documentary maker Michael something. I can't remember his name.
Michael Moore?
Yeah, Michael Moore. Thank you. Talking about people throwing a wrench in the political system, especially
Yeah.
people in Detroit, and they're the ones that would vote for him not because they like him, but because he would throw a wrench in the system, and that's honestly what they want.
Yeah.
That's kind of what anyone who's an anarchist or a minarchist would want at the moment is a wrench in the system because we are sick and tired of the status quo.
Yes.
It's not that I think he's good, it's that I want that wrench.
Yeah, I want it all burned to the ground. I want the system to be treated how the ATF treated Waco. Burnt to the ground in the charred remains of everything, not the people, the system, visible for all to see.
I just want the Federal Reserve to be charged, and that's all I care about.
The fact that no one has burned down the Federal Reserve, again, not saying go do it, but
Do it.
the fact, but
In
the
Minecraft.
fact that no one
I was gonna say
has
in Minecraft.
yes, has burnt that building to the ground and salted the earth so that nothing can ever grow there again in the past 100 years is deeply distressing and concerning.
You know, I'm not a big fan of griefing, but in some instances it's necessary.
Yes, the creature from Jekyll Island must be stopped.
Okay, let's try to get through Jim Jordan's this is going to take frickin' forever.
Earlier this year, the ATF issued a rule that unilaterally puts new restrictions on Second Amendment rights. This rule redefined firearms with stabilizing braces as short-barreled rifles so that they could be controlled under the Gun Control Act of 1968, the National Firearms Act of 1934. There are approximately 40 million firearms with stabilizing braces currently in circulation. The pistol brace was created for use by disabled persons, including disabled veterans. These individuals could lose the ability to use these tools and as a result may not be able to operate their firearm. Under the new rule, these firearm owners will be required to obtain special registration, surrender or destroy their brace by the compliance date, or they will face severe criminal penalties. This is not the result of a decision made by Congress. Congress didn't change the law. No bill was introduced in this committee, passed by this committee, passed by the House, passed by the Senate, and signed by the President. Nope. This rule turns law-abiding gun owners into felons is a result of unelected bureaucrats simply enacting a new regulation. And that's not how it's supposed to work in our great country. Congress writes the laws and the executive branch enforces them.
Well, you see, Congress used to write the laws, and then you had this nice little thing called the Patriot Act, where Congress delegated pretty much all of its lawmaking powers to the executive branch, and rarely in the time since has done any lawmaking itself.
Yeah. Well, I would say it even goes back further. This is all all of this is a result of a Supreme Court case known as Chevron. I remember it's Chevron versus something. I can't remember the full title, but where they basically ruled incorrectly that federal agencies basically determine their own power. Right? They can determine how much power they have to do whatever it is that they're supposed to do. Oh,
Dale,
wasn't. Yeah.
I kind of expected you to go on like this all started with Woodrow Wilson or something like that.
Yes, but also no.
The Chevron deference case in and of itself was more about civil powers, in which, yes, it was still decided incorrectly, but in cases where civil liability was the only punishment, that was seen a bit more nice, a bit more easier to swallow. Whereas in this instance, we're dealing with something called lenity. I can't remember the precedent, but it's the rule of lenity, and basically that ruling came down and said that anything that involves criminal acts in an ambiguous law, the court is supposed to look at it and read the law in the most generous definition of the ambiguous law. And considering that the ATF doesn't get to change the law under the rule of lenity, it's the court is supposed to read that law as it is and err on the side of the person that's accused of committing the crime.
Right. So when you say as generously as possible, you mean in defense of the accused, correct?
Correct.
All right.
So if the Gun Control Act of 1986 doesn't have bump stocks or stabilizing braces written into it, then the court has to rule in favor of the accused when it comes to criminal violations. So for instance, the Fifth Circuit, that just this week, I think it was Tuesday, had ruled that you can't ban bump stock.
Yeah.
And now we have a severe split in the court. Two different circuits have decided differently. One circuit has said the ATF has the power to ban bump stocks. One circuit has said the ATF doesn't have the power to ban bump stocks, and then one circuit is completely split on the decision.
Sounds right for some Supreme Court jurisprudence.
Sounds right indeed.
Hopefully authored by one Justice Clarence Thomas.
I want Kavanaugh to get in on that one.
You do?
Yeah.
From what I've seen, Kavanaugh is a bit of... He's wishy-washy a bit in the same way that Kennedy was wishy-washy a bit, just not as much.
Yeah.
I'd much rather a very firm Thomas opinion.
If you've read any of Kavanaugh's decisions, a lot of the problems that the Democrats had with him over the time that he was going through his not consent
His nomination.
inform and consent hearing.
Right.
A lot of the issues that the Democrats brought up were how broadly his decisions were written. And a long-standing Supreme Court justice is going to extremely narrowly tailor their decision. Whereas someone who's a bit newer who hasn't been on the bench for, say, 10, 20, 30 years is going to is going, the inexperienced person is going to continue with their bad habits and write their rulings in such a manner that it can be broadly interpreted. And while Clarence Thomas did a good job of opening up a bit of broadness in the Bruin decision, he didn't go broad enough.
That is true. He did not.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So since you guys mentioned Clarence Thomas, what is your opinion of him? Like everyone, I want to know what you think of him.
Best Supreme Court justice that I know of. He's only person I think would be willing to overturn a lot of the nonsense like rulings of the early and mid 20th century. Also, one of the only justices who is firmly committed to abolishing precedent that's wrong. Right, a lot of these justices have something against removing prior bad decisions. Thomas seems like he is the only one who does not suffer from that specific form of insanity.
He's good on some things, he's bad on others. I've seen some of his rulings on First Amendment cases that just go way out of bounds when it comes to protecting civil liberties, especially when he's in the dissenting group. It's a little bit disturbing watching some of his dissents, and some of them have been reminiscent of the dissenters, or the one major dissenter in the West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, from the 1943 SCOTUS case.
That was the prayer in school one, right?
No, that was forced participation in the national anthem and Pledge of Allegiance,
Right.
where students that were Jehovah's Witnesses were told not to stand and not to say the pledge, and they were getting suspended and kicked out of school, and parents were being arrested, and that was following a prior Supreme Court case from 1938 where the Supreme Court had ruled 7-2 that it was legal to compel patriotism. And in between those 5 years, there had been lynchings of people who wouldn't participate in such events.
And Thomas has erred on the side of the first. Of the He's erred on the side of the first decision more so than the second.
There have been dissents that he has written that are reminiscent of that first decision that was overturned.
I see.
Those decisions, as most dissenting opinions, are usually all emotional and have no actual statements of fact. For the most part, he's good on Second Amendment. He's good on Fourth and Sixth Amendment cases. When we come to First or Fifth Amendment, he's a little bit wobbly.
That is true. just on that, because one thing where I am very firmly in the Thomas camp on is his seemingly burning desire to abolish the concept of substantive due process. I'm curious as to where you stand on the issue of substantive due process and all the penumbras and emanations that followed Griswold v. Connecticut.
Seeing Griswold v. Connecticut.
So the issue with Griswold v. Connecticut, at least in my opinion, is not like the law was a dumb law, but the issue was that certain rights were just made up during that ruling,
Mm-hmm.
and the legal reasoning was the term emanations and penumbras is kind of what people who disagree with this decision refer to it as mockingly, where basically there are certain rights in the Constitution, and from these rights, there are emanations, basically meaning lights are coming out of these rights, and these emanations cast penumbras, meaning shadows. These lights cast shadows,
Mm-hmm.
and in those shadows, we found the right to X.
Okay. Yeah. No. So the right of privacy.
Well, not necessarily privacy. Just like this line of reasoning has been used.
I'm talking in broad terms. Over the years, the Supreme Court has ruled the right to privacy is covered by the Fourth Amendment. They've ruled that the right to free expression is part of free speech, even though it's not written into the amendment. And in certain cases, I agree with that.
Hmm.
So a lot of the Roe v. Wade discussion
Mhm.
came out of the right to privacy.
Yeah.
And even though the Fourth Amendment doesn't actually say you have a right to privacy, it does say you have a right to be secure in your person's papers, effects, and property.
Right.
And one of those things is papers, medical papers, and you have a right to be free from government interference in medical papers and procedures, which means those things have to be private from the government.
Right.
That's why I begrudgingly fall on the side of, or that's one of the reasons why I begrudgingly fall on the side of pro-choice.
But I would just say on that, there aren't really any medical procedures that terminate a human life. Medical procedures throughout history have been for the sole purpose of someone not dying.
And you're right, but it is still a medical procedure.
Like,
And
yes, but kind of. Is it can a medical procedure be instituted for the specific goal of killing someone? Like, and I say this, I'm from Canada, where it's now legally, suicide is now legal here. And not only is it legal, if your treatment's too expensive, your doctors will recommend it.
Yeah,
And I don't think that's a medical procedure either. That's just murder.
Well, and that's where the whole safe, legal, and rare terminology came from.
Mhm.
We understand it's a life, and we understand that at some point we have to step in and we have to protect that life. But because they can't speak for themselves, and the parent that wants to terminate doesn't want to speak for the life of the child. It's it's a it's one of those ambiguous areas where the Constitution both covers the right of the unborn child to live and doesn't cover the right of the unborn child to live.
Yeah, well, I would say on that the Constitution doesn't really say much on that specific thing. Um, like, which is why, at least in my opinion, it should be left up to the states because it's not really like one has to do a lot of twisting to say whether that specific thing is like addressed in the Constitution because
The the simple fact of the matter is there's ambiguity.
the one thing I will say, and this will probably be the most pro-choice thing I will ever say, I will ever be recorded saying, but there is a line of reasoning that is somewhat I can somewhat agree with. And are you familiar with the concept of evictionism rather than abortion?
It's still a bit brutal, though.
Well, so this is a theory developed by Marie Rothbard many years ago, where abortion is actually two separate acts. The first is the going in and dismembering the child, and the second is the removal of the now dead child from the womb. The first act is what is the morally wrong, right? In that no one has an innate right to exist in a certain space, but that you can't, like, they have the right to not be murdered, but they don't have the right to not be removed from the womb.
Yes.
And I am still very much on the other side, but that is I can see the merits in that line of reasoning because you're not actively you're not going in, killing, and then dragging the remains out. You're just removing the living child, and if they survive on their own, they survive. If not, they don't.
Yeah, which is a bit difficult before 28 weeks.
Yeah.
Even at 28 weeks, it's still difficult.
Yes. But on the other hand, that would also, all the money that is now spent trying to ban abortion would then likely be spent trying to invest in technology that would make it so that the child would be able to live. Like you would, all those people those pro-life people who spend their money and their time would direct the effort to trying to better technology to where they could now survive out of the womb longer because that would be the issue of why they are now dying.
All right, so we've gone on a bit of a tangent.
Indeed.
Let's go ahead and reel that back in. Let's finish out the chairman's speech.
Here, the executive branch has taken power from Congress in deciding what the law should be, and that they charge themselves with enforcing. Director Dettelbach has in essence become a one-man Congress. Notably, this decision runs counter to the ATF's decision under President Obama in 2012 that a firearm equipped with a stabilizing brace was, quote, would not be subject to the National Firearms Act and those controls. An independent analysis of financial harm to the firearms industry from the pistol brace ban has been estimated to exceed $1 billion. Law-abiding firearm owners relied on this ruling for a decade before having the rug pulled out from under them this year by Director Dettelbach's ATF. And it's not just with the stabilizing brace rule that the ATF is attacking the Second Amendment. They've also targeted firearms businesses by creating pretenses to shut them down. The new classifications are left purposely broad and allow the ATF to revoke the licenses of FFLs for simple technical and non-material paperwork violations. In
could you
2022,
pause?
ATF revoked over 90.
Yeah.
So I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
Is the ATF within the executive branch?
Yes.
Ah, yeah.
So-
Next question was like, why is the executive branch having all this power bad? But now I understand.
So just to explain, Molly, any federal agency is by nature executive branch.
Yeah,
So
I get the executive branch
ATF,
now.
FBI, ATF, FBI, Department of X, they all fall under the executive branch.
Okay, I understand now. I'm deeply revolted.
As
Yeah.
we are.
So our form of government was based heavily on the Magna Carta, in which there was a separation of powers, and the judiciary actually was supposed to hold more power than the executive branch. Or not the judiciary, the Congress, the legislature.
Legislative?
Yeah.
The legislative branch was supposed to be able to hold power over the executive branch and hold them accountable for things that were not within the laws that the legislative branch had approved of.
Right.
Yeah.
90 licenses, more than any year since
So, sorry,
2006.
you pause?
This is an attack on the Second Amendment, pure and simple, plain and simple. And I want to thank Director Dettelbach for appearing before us today, and we look forward to hearing from him and his taking our questions. With that, I would yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Molly,
Thank
you
you,
had a
Mr.
question?
Yeah, sorry. So how do we wrestle power back from the executive branch? Is it possible?
Yes. I mean, there are many ways. Some would argue that the only way is agorism, which I'm not sure if you are familiar with. Basically, divest as much as possible into the gray market and like kind of just slowly bleed the system to death.
So you basically
So-
just want to collapse the economy or something?
You want to quote Ron Swanson, to see this whole thing come crumbling down.
Yeah.
Which is
But how do you
anarchism.
do that besides like
Um,
economically?
Some could argue you can do this by voting the correct people in, but that
Oh.
seems a bit suspicious.
Yeah,
But what
no,
if that's rigged?
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole point. When it comes to wanting to see the whole thing tumbling down, you just don't comply.
Yeah.
If you get enough people to not comply with the legislature and with the executive branch, what happens is, either the government is going to come after the whole lot of you, or things are going to change, and rather quickly. Everything's going to crumble immediately, and we will be left having to rebuild society anew. But you could argue that that's going to happen either way you go, because even if you took the first option, where the government comes after the whole lot of you, they're not going to win.
Yeah. It's also worth noting that, like, in the option where the government just comes after you, we can see similar things in both India with a man named Gandhi, as well as the U.S. itself in the civil rights era with Martin Luther King Jr. even people who aren't necessarily on your side, even for example in the US, like the people who were actually to a degree racist and did not like blacks, even they were made uncomfortable by the videos coming out of peaceful people having dogs sicked on them and being brutalized in the street. So even if the government does get violent, that tends that may in fact turn the average person more against them, right? You don't like the average person doesn't like seeing videos of peaceful people just being brutalized in the streets. It's how Gandhi freed India, and it's how people like MLK got the civil rights passed.
Yeah, but like, okay, so I'm gonna use the collapse of Yugoslavia for this example. But back then in the 90s, people called the bulldozer revolution. It's what we call the bulldozer revolution because we use bulldozers to oust militias. But there were still people on his side defending him, the army and the police. And you're still gonna have a lot of people that are gonna defend the system, like no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yes.
Yes, and that's true, but take a look at the founding of the United States. There were lots and lots of supporters of the British Army.
Yep.
And
Only 3% is needed.
and what King George was doing, but as the army became more and more frustrated with how the war was going and with the guerrilla warfare tactics that some militia members used, shout out to the Patriot, they started burning down villages and killing innocent people. And when you start doing that, your supporters quickly turn against you, which is what happened.
You will always have some people who are okay, who are perfectly fine with that, but there are a lot more people who aren't perfectly fine with just senseless murder and massacres.
Yeah.
So when the U.S. Revolution started, um, it started at about 3% of the citizenry, but it grew to 15% by the time the war had ended because of all of the heinous acts of the British Empire and its army.
But you don't actually, with an armed population, you don't actually need that much percentage of the population to successfully overthrow your government.
Yeah,
No,
but like,
15% of the people in the U.S. rose up. But let's see, there's 350 million people in the U.S. So what's 15% of that? 30% of that would be about 100 million. So that's 50. That's an army of 50 million people.
yeah,
Right?
Yeah,
All of whom are going to be going in and out of the general population, and that you won't be able to track really. Right?
Well,
the U.S. lost a war in Afghanistan, with a substantially less armed population, with worse weaponry and a lot less cover.
well, take take the take the number of people in the U.S. That's 360 million. Now cut out women and children.
Yeah.
That leaves you with 120 million. Remove half of that for um for uh for whichever side is supporting the government at the time, and you're left with 60 million 60 million men that if they are politically initiated would be supporting. Now you take that and you you take 15% of that That's 9 million. And that is a death beating to the entire military. Let's just go with 1%. It's still 600,000, and that's a fairly even odds. But if you go with 3%, that's 1.8 million, and you're decimating the U.S. military.
And that's assuming the entirety of the military goes along with this. And the U.S.
But what if,
From my
like,
understanding, military people in the U.S. tend to actually respect the Constitution. Some would, of course, go along, but not only would there be some that outright sided with the revolutionaries, there would also be those who did so covertly and would be acting against the military from within.
True, but that actually makes me think because on Twitter, I'm not too big a fan of the guy politically, but uh, the YouTuber and Twitter personality, I believe it was Rocky Warvet. He had actually did a poll that had got several 100,000 like responses where it was asking, do you think that the United States military would open fire on US citizens if ordered to?
Oh, yeah.
Obviously not implying every single member, but had came in with a result of it was about like 75 to 80% of people that like participated in the poll said
Mm-hmm.
yes, they believe that uh, there would absolutely be people following orders.
Yeah.
And even me, for example, me living here in like me from Ohio, we have a history of this with the massacre that happened at Kent State.
Right.
Yeah, so that's
Which
Iraq
I can't
veteran
believe anything
8888.
started opening fire on a bunch of protesters back during, I believe it was the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
it was the 70s, I think.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a substantial
I
amount
think
of
let me
the
actually
military
look that up
would.
just so I can.
Yeah, I thought it was late 60s, but I may be wrong. But yeah, I would.
Let me actually look that up real quick
All right.
so that I can have a set date behind it. Kent.
And then also,
Uh,
uh,
the massacre at Kent State was May 4th of 1970.
huh, a bit later than I thought. But yeah, there is also no discussion of, Civil War 2.0 that can be had without at least referencing the famous meme that starts with, "Listen, you fantastically stupid motherfucker." I think you all know what I'm talking about. Would it be all right if we pulled that meme up just so we could educate the uninformed about it?
I tell you what,
Possibly. I've probably seen it, but it's not coming to my mind.
you go ahead and post one of those in the chat, and I may bring it
Alright.
up during the stream.
Excellent. It's one of those. If you know the "Don't make me tap the sign" meme, it's the
Uh-huh.
go-to one for.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jerry Nadler, he's up next.
Chairman, let me begin by first apologizing for the slander we heard this morning directed at one of the great public servants of our time, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Mr. Chairman, violence continues to take the lives of more than 100 Americans every single day. It changes how safe we feel in our homes, in our schools, and in our houses of worship. It reduces vibrant cities to somber headlines. It takes our loved ones, old and young, and leaves us with another anniversary of lives cut short and a community forever traumatized. We have already lost more than 13,000 Americans to gun deaths so far this year, including 80 young children, 469 teens, and 18 law enforcement officers. We are the only nation in the industrialized world that tolerates such gruesome statistics. It is against this sobering background that Republicans have called this hearing to criticize the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the law enforcement agency tasked with keeping guns out of the wrong hands. At least Republicans are transparent about their goal: to pressure, intimidate, and hamstring the agency so that it can no longer effectively do its job and protect Americans from violent crime.
All right, everyone. Good news. I found the meme. Also, so Moy, you mentioned earlier about the Yugoslavian Civil War.
Yeah.
Would you care to elaborate on that a bit, just for those of us who, like, some of us who may not understand exactly what went down there?
Yeah, so basically, like during the 90s, people got fed up with the fact that the war was going on and everything, and they wanted to put an end to it because after so many wars, like it was really fucking bad. There was a recession, there was a lack of resources and everything, and they basically grabbed bulldozers, any vehicles, and they tried to barricade roads and like stop things from working and protest in front of the National Assembly and stuff. And I'm not sure how it went, but it's on Wikipedia and probably it says more than I know.
Yeah, but what I more meant was like the Yugoslavian Civil War itself. Like that was the more a thing that happened at the end of it, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but the initial civil war was when
Yeah.
the republics wanted to leave because of self-interest and because Serbia was pushing its nationalism. Basically, Serbia was wanting to enforce its will upon the other republics, and be like a federal government and control everything.
Now, was Yugoslavia set up to be something more autonomous, or was the like when it was first created, or was it more just a top-down? Like, was it always kind of top-down heavy?
Um, Originally, like all the republics had autonomy, but then
Hmm. This was before.
as yeah, sorry, as Tito died and other people got into power, they started like being more, worrying about their state slash nation and less about the entire like federation. So
So
it was
people.
Serbia that started it because the other ones were cooperative, and we were trying to centralize power by basically fragmenting Serbia a little bit by having the province of Vojvodina, the province of Kosovo, and then my province where I'm from. So we have like more votes than the other republics. That was the goal, like kind of getting like those and Montenegro and stuff on our side, so we can outvote the other republics.
I see. And now Yugoslavia. Correct me if I'm wrong, but during World War One, the agreement was not to originally to create a new nation of Yugoslavia. It was just to create Greater Serbia, was it not?
Yeah, that was the London Agreement, but for some
Yeah,
reason it was replaced by Yugoslavia. But
right.
essentially, Serbia would get just Bosnia and like Montenegro.
Hmm. And instead, it just gets the whole of the Balkans, basically.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit weird, but yeah.
Yeah. Would that initially have included Kosovo, or was Kosovo at the time still part of Serbia?
Kosovo was still a part of Serbia as well. Same as Macedonia. It was originally territory of Serbia.
Hmm. And then the whole night thing in the 90s went down.
And the whole jar in the
Nitro,
ass thing.
yeah, the Serbian. If you want to hear a funny story, to the people in the audience, look up Count Dankula's video on the Serbian bottle incident.
Oh,
So be
Jesus.
warned, it is not for the faint of heart,
Yeah.
but
The
it is pretty
Serbian
damn funny.
bottle incident, you said?
No,
Yes.
it's the jar incident.
I think the video title was the Serbian bottle incident, but yeah, it's graphic
Okay, so
and also really funny.
I'm going to jump ahead in the video a little bit. Holy crap. I'm gonna go ahead and jump ahead, and since we're talking about funny stories, I'm gonna pull up a cracked.com article from before 2010, and
So back when Cracked was still funny.
yeah, and let y'all laugh.
All right.
Balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back without objection. All of their opening statements will
All
be
right, let's
included
do
in the
this.
record. We will now introduce today's witness, Mr. Dettelbach. The Honorable Stephen Dettelbach was sworn in as director of the ATF on July 13th, 2022. As director, he is responsible for leading an agency charged with enforcing, laws and regulations related to firearms, explosives, arson, alcohol, tobacco, and tobacco trafficking. He previously served as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, and in various positions with the Department of Justice and U.S. Attorney's offices. Welcome our witness today and thank him for appearing. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Please be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony, and you've done this before, Mr. Dettelbach. You get 5 minutes. You know how it works, and then we'll proceed with questioning. So, Mr. Dettelbach, you can start your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, and members of the committee. I'm honored to appear before this committee to discuss the public safety mission of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I'm also honored to represent the dedicated men and women of ATF who work tirelessly and often risk everything alongside our law enforcement partners to protect the American people from violence.
Is that protect the American people by taking photo ops on top of burned women and children?
Yep. Is it protecting them by sniping the wives of American citizens for no reason?
Quite possibly. Let's see if
No, it's them protecting us by shooting our dogs and coming in and instituting no-knock raids on the wrong house.
That too.
Violent crime. At ATF, everything we do begins and ends with public safety. ATF is a small law enforcement agency, just over 5,100 employees, with a huge mission to prevent, disrupt, and reduce violent crime. As director of ATF, I am briefed on what feels like countless murders and shootings that take place across the United States every day. This includes the mass murder incidents that often grab national headlines, such as last month's horrific murders at the Tennessee school, but it also includes countless shootings that take place every day, devastate families and communities, but don't make the news. By some counts,
And that's
so
just
far
their
this year, there have already been 174 mass shootings.
Yeah, those are just their in-house numbers.
yeah, those are definitely in-house numbers. They are not actual headline mass shootings. These are the ones that don't get press because the press doesn't believe them to be important communities, i.e. Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta. You get the gist.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I gotta go do my girlfriend's hair. I'll be back soon.
Okay.
You gotta go do your girlfriend.
Yes,
Bow chicka
Alright.
bow wow.
her hair.
Oh.
I'll be
All right.
back
Thanks.
fast.
See you in a bit.
All right, see ya. But yeah, I'm definitely familiar with that as the town that I'm from. It had like locally had a nickname of actually Little Chicago because for quite a while, like
What
per
a
capita, it
coincidence.
had the same amount of violent crimes as Chicago did. And this is just small town in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. But because of the fact that it runs along a major intersection, it's just riddled with drugs and of course along with the violent crime that comes with like these heavy drugs, and that's also
Mhm.
coming from me who uh, being here a couple weeks back, I am in recovery from substance abuse, so I am very familiar with like the types of people that are around and just like the types of people that would be causing these violent like gun crimes, uh,
Yeah.
just by the fact that usually like where there's meth dealers, where there's fentanyl dealers, there are going to be firearms, and they are going to be firearms that very likely have a body on them.
Mhm. Is this one of those like decaying rust belt towns that like used to
Oh,
be
yeah, it definitely.
yeah, so it used to be not just a den of like suffering and horror. It used to actually be like a thriving town, but it's due to due to globalization has kind of descended into darkness.
Yeah, we kind of joke around here. The only like the two things that you can find here are like restaurants, like usually like chain restaurants like
Mhm.
Chipotle, McDonald's. Like I think we have like 5 Subways, and then
Hmm.
drugs, mainly meth and fentanyl.
All right.
Well, I mean it's quite a coincidence because the city that me and Coda live in has also carried the nickname of Little Chicago uh, for uh, about 40 years now. Um,
Hmm.
and just like Chicago, the dangerous areas of the city have shifted around from year to year. We don't live too far from uh, that dangerous area, which is why I stay armed all the time.
Hmm. Is it also like
Yeah,
meth central over there, or
Um, no, it's it's pretty much nothing but marijuana around here.
Hmm.
Um,
oh,
I
lucky. I guarantee you, I could probably go out the door, walk about like a half hour, just calling out like, "Hey, anybody got an 8 ball?" And I could probably find something.
well, and that's the thing. Um, the speed and cocaine are more so in the college towns, so Iowa City
Hmm.
and Waterloo. You're gonna find that a bit more. Um, and it is coming back because they have built several truck stops around the Cedar Rapids area.
Mhm.
Mm.
Um,
Do truck stops tend to attract the nefarious drug dealing type?
yes, sometimes.
And also with meth, because the fact that it's kind of like it's joked, but it is kind of a stereotype with truckers like using especially meth because of the fact that it's cheap. It's stimulant so that they can stay awake and alert driving for hours upon end, even though technically, according to the what is it, the Department of Transportation and like all the places that regard like control like driving jobs, say they're not supposed to drive for more than I think it's like 10 hours per day,
And
but
that
ignoring those in order to get to their destination faster. So meth is huge with truck drivers.
I
that would
always thought that was just regular speed, like so-called uppers and whatnot.
that Uh, well, I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, it was. Now, when it comes to regulatory agencies for trucking, it's actually the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the
Okay.
FMCSA,
Okay.
and it's 11 hours driving, 4 hours, or not 4 hours, 14 hours on duty. So you can spend a total of 14 hours on duty. You can drive a total of 11 hours within that 14 hours of duty time. And once you reach either the 14 or the 11, whichever comes first, you have to take a 10-hour break before you can drive again.
Are these
Yeah, which is why
like strongly enforced, or is it like do people get away with just doing more if they want all the time?
Well, there's paper logs, and those are very rare these days. Generally, everyone's on electronic log devices, aka ELDs. And if ever you're stopped, a cop or a DOT officer will ask for your logs, and you just hand them the tablet, and they'll go through it. But back
Right.
in back before ELDs were a thing, paper logs, you had to keep them, and we in the industry used to call them comic books because it's all made up.
Nice. Is there any benefit to say like getting like driving longer than you're allowed to in order to get like delivered faster? Like you get like as there like bonuses if you were faster than expected or anything? Or
For smaller companies, when everyone was still on comic books, yeah, absolutely. If you could drive, from coast to coast in 3 days, you'd you'd get great uh you'd get a great bonus because you'd finish out the load early. But now on ELDs from coast to coast, say you're going uh from Georgia to California, that's at least a 4.5 day trip.
really? Huh.
though
Um
people are also like I've been seeing kind of doing tandem teams of two, so that like it's two people in the vehicle, so that one person will have their downtime, say
Mm-hmm.
sleep in on the little bed in the back while the other person is driving, and then at that 11 or 14 hours switch out. That way that other person, they've had that 10 hours downtime so that they can now legally go back and start driving again.
Yeah, you have to be really good at sleeping in those instances. And I have seen a DOT officer interrupt someone's 10-hour break, and that really screws with time. Um, in reality, a DOT officer is not allowed to bring a driver on duty if they're in the sleeper berth.
huh. But they still do it?
Yep, they still do it. Let's get back to Bettle Doc.
And 99 law enforcement officers have been shot in the line of duty. Every day, more than 100 people in America die from gun violence, and many more are permanently injured. Victims and survivors of gun violence deserve better, as do their families, their communities, and law enforcement officers, including those at ATF and our local partners, who every day run toward the gunfire. The level of gun violence in America is quite simply unacceptable. Because of the way our constitutional system is designed, fighting violent crime falls first to local, state, and tribal law enforcement, and we at ATF are deeply committed to supporting them.
I said when he was saying how these law enforcement run right into the face of danger, I just said, not in Uvalde, they don't.
Yeah, not in Uvalde. Honestly, the only time the ATF runs towards gunfire is when they start it.
Yep.
in those efforts. ATF embodies the Department of Justice's commitment to combat violent crime by being a force multiplier to our law enforcement partners. We stand shoulder to shoulder with them each day to help reduce and fight violent crime all over this nation. That's what ATF agents did with the brave men and women of the Tulare County Sheriff's Department recently, when they took gunfire standing side by side to arrest a mass killer in Goshen, California. That person had allegedly executed a 10-month-old baby. And we do that all the time with our partners. There is really no better partner for the courageous people in local.
There is no more courageous partner than California. It's California for the ATF.
Basically.
Law enforcement than their courageous partners at ATF. ATF's efforts are driven by two priorities: get shooters off the street and cut off the unlawful supply of firearms that fuels their violence. One of our greatest assets in accomplishing these priorities is our expertise in crime.
What's that?
They forgot their other very important duty, and that's pet control.
Pet control. Okay,
And
so
yes, we are going to beat this dead horse of them shooting dogs, just like they beat on the
Shoot
corpse of dead
dogs.
dogs.
yes, exactly. Okay, so I see that you actually went ahead and posted that that 4chan post.
Copy
in here.
pasta, yeah.
Yeah. Listen,
Did you?
you
Where was it?
Huh?
Where was it posted?
Oh, it's in the voice
uh,
chat.
Like, if you just click on the Saturday stream channel, it should take you to the chat, or there should be a way to say see chat.
It says,
there it
"Listen,
is.
listen, you fantastically retarded motherfucker. I'm going to try to explain this so that you can understand it. You cannot control an entire country and its people with tanks, jets, battleships, and drones, or any of these things that you so stupidly believe trumps citizens' ownership of firearms. A fighter jet, tank, drone, battleship, or whatever cannot stand on street corners and enforce no assembly edicts. A fighter jet cannot kick down your door at 3 a.m. and search your house for contraband."
I mean, granted, they probably think that you're gonna like attack the like National Assembly with the fighter jet and just drop bombs to kill them all. Maybe that's what they're thinking.
It addresses that point.
No, police are needed to maintain a police state, boots on the ground. And no matter how many police you have on the ground, they will always be vastly outnumbered by citizens, which is why in a police state it is vital that your police have automatic weapons, while the people have nothing but their limp beep.
Yeah,
I
but
think you accidentally skipped over the third paragraph, or the
Oh, yeah,
paragraph before that.
I did. I'm sorry. None of these things can maintain the needed police state to completely subjugate and enslave the people of a nation. Those weapons are for decimating, flattening, and glassing large areas and many people at once, and fighting over state military. The government does not want to kill all of its people and blow up its own infrastructure. These are the very things they need to be tyrannical assholes in the first place. If they decided to turn everything outside of Washington, D.C. into glowing green glass, they would be the absolute rulers of a big, worthless, radioactive pile of shit. Police are needed to maintain a police state, boots on the ground, and no matter how many police you have on the ground, they will always be vastly outnumbered by citizens or civilians, which is why in a police state it is vital that your police have automatic weapons while the people have nothing but their limp dicks. But when every random pedestrian could have a Glock in their waistband and every random homeowner an AR-15, all of that goes out the window because now the police are outnumbered and face the reality of bullets coming back at them. If you want living examples of this, look at every insurgency in the US military has tried to destroy. They're all kicking with nothing but AK-47s, pickup trucks, and improvised explosive devices because these big scary military monsters you keep alluding to are all but useless for dealing with them.
Yeah,
Followed,
but
followed by the last very important line: dumb bleep.
Just say it, dumb fuck.
Dumb fuck. Such a great fucking coffee pasta that, and it's true.
Well, that wasn't just a copy pasta. That's straight from 4chan.
Yeah. And as they alluded in the post, we have proof of this, right? Afghanistan, all the other insurgencies they're
Let's see.
trying to quell that they haven't been able to quell for 2 decades.
Vietnam,
Hell,
Iraq,
and
Afghanistan, Iraq the second time, Iraq the third time, Afghanistan the second time, Afghanistan the third time, Afghanistan the fourth time.
Yep. The only thing they were really able
and
to
I was
kind of
actually gonna say,
quash
as far
was
as like
oh, sorry. The only thing they were really able to kind of quash was ISIS, but that was again more. ISIS was kind of its own state, so that was more one state just trying to batter the other one, and the one with
but
the bigger
ISIS was
weapons
also
kind of
like
won.
conventional.
Yeah, it was. Well, ISIS is weird because it did kind of have it do its own conventional like fighting force, but it was also an insurgency kind of, and
Let's just be honest. Trump was lying when he said he got rid of ISIS because ISIS is still around and
yeah.
there's just no getting rid of it.
Well, it is around, but it's not really a state in the same way it was. It was kind of a pseudo state earlier on. Now it's
It was a pseudo
sorry?
state. It is no longer, but it's still around. It is still an
Yeah.
insurgency, just like the Taliban. They never went anywhere. They're still around.
Yep.
You
Well,
can
now even the Taliban, now they're back running the government of Afghanistan again.
well, and that just goes into show exactly my point in that you cannot fight ideology with force. You can't do
Yeah.
it. It's impossible. We did it for nearly 40 years from 1950 until what was it 1991 with the war on communism, aka the Cold War.
Mhm.
It's nothing but an endless string of combat and conflicts. We say we're at war, but Congress never declared war.
Yep.
and I was gonna say that's actually like in instances like that are with organizations that are like armed with conventional weapons, be it with the Soviet Union arming, like for example, Vietnam with like factory production made AKs, things like that. But now we're in an age of like 3D printed firearms, things like
Yeah.
the FGC9, where it's essentially a carbine chambered in 9 millimeter, and people love going more recently like, oh, those things will blow up after 2 or 3 rounds.
No.
I've started looking into the 3D printed firearms community, and no. For example, we could even look at the ongoing civil war in Myanmar, where rebels are using 3D printed firearms
Yeah.
actively right
Yeah,
now in like armed conflict.
Yeah, like the whole 3D printed guns would break after the first shot thing. That was true in 2010. It's not true now. That was true when there was like that was true in the days of the Liberator, like the first one.
Yeah, and
It's
Yeah.
gotten a lot better.
Meanwhile, now I'm looking forward to Ivan the Troll coming out with the upcoming version 4 of the Plastikov, which, for people who aren't very much aware, it is a 3D printed upper and lower receiver, essentially for the AK platform. So it can fire and take the recoil for 545 and 7.62 by 39.
Damn.
it's probably also very well structurally reinforced and requires you print at a very specific angle.
Yeah, I will say that yes, it does require like a certain infill rate. A lot of these are at least 50% to higher. That's essentially like 50% of it is plastic, 50% of it's air. Otherwise, like less than that will have structural issues, but a lot of these are able to handle recoil. For example, with one that I had printed recently, it was the U Bolt as the name of it. It had a recommended infill rate of about 15 to 50%. That is, it replaces a typical AR-15 lower receiver, but then of course there is the aptly named Biden's Bane. It is AR upper. Though those types of things like that are a little bit harder to deal with because of obviously the heat that is generated from firing around, everything like that, and then melting of plastic. But essentially, as far as like just armed forces being able to access arms, that 3D printed lower receiver is the gun right there. Everything else, honestly, I can buy that on websites and just have it shipped to your front door. And as far as me personally in the United States, that's all legal,
Hmm.
and that's perfectly fine. It's been a thing that's been around since the founding of our country, if not before. The act of manufacturing firearms. It's part of the First Amendment, even or not First Amendment, the Second Amendment, even. But then with just the advancements that everything has been making.
Um,
Yeah.
I printed the U-Bolt once.
Sorry if I ramble a bit.
It is very nice. Um, so we got through about 10 minutes. We got through about 10 minutes of that video.
One quick question before we get back. Do you know what? Since you mentioned Congress has not declared war since I believe World War II. Do you know
Correct.
what exactly? Like, is it the AUMF they're operating on right now, or is it a different justification for like the various wars we're in?
It's pretty much all police action.
So wait, it doesn't have anything to do with the AUMF, or is it?
I've never actually heard of the AUMF.
Oh, I believe it's the act for. Let me pull it up. What exactly it is? It's the act for something military force. AUMF. Uh, it's the authorization of use of military force.
Isn't that it's like the president of the United States can like deploy forces at his own discretion
Yeah.
necessarily for obviously it's got to be in instances that are approved or can be
Yeah.
like defended in the UN's eyes.
Okay,
So
so
it is specifically the authorization of for use of military force of 2001,
yeah,
and it's
September 18th, 2001.
Yeah.
In general, that the president is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. War Powers Resolution requirements. Specific statutory authorization consistent with Section 8A1 of the War Powers Resolution. The Congress declares that this section is intended to constitute specific statutory authorizations within the meaning of Section 5B of the War Powers Resolution. Applicability of other requirements. Nothing in this resolution supersedes any requirements of the War Powers Resolution. So, yeah, they basically gave the president and the executive branch, and this is what led up to the Patriot Act, the ability to basically continue to declare war on an ideology. Because
All right.
after honestly, after 10 years, do you really think after we killed all of the people that were involved in September 11th, do you really, honestly, does anyone really believe that there is anyone left? Anyone? I mean, we got rid of Osama bin Laden. We
Yep.
got rid of who was the ruler of Iraq?
Saddam
Hussein. We got rid of him. So there's two governments there. We know Pakistan was involved, and
Yeah.
yet
No, we don't say anything about that.
we don't go into Pakistan because, I mean, Russia.
They have nukes as well.
We know Iran was involved.
Yeah.
and
Saudi Arabia.
and
Don't
Saudi
forget
Arabia.
them. Don't forget that the people who did it were all Saudi nationals.
Yeah.
And when we tried to investigate that, it kind of got vetoed by Obama.
When it comes down to it, it's all a farce. It's been a farce from the beginning, and it will continue to be a farce. What Congress did was just give the executive branch a blanket power, or a blanket absolvement of abuse of power.
Yeah.
Okay. We will continue the ATF video in the after hours. I want to bring on the 5 real life soldiers who make Rambo look like a pussy.
Simo Haya, of course.
Simo Haya. Who was he? Simo Haya had a fairly boring life in Finland. He served his 1 mandatory year in the military and then became a farmer. But when the Soviet Union invaded his homeland in 1939, he decided he wanted to help his country. Since the majority of fighting took place in the forest, he figured the best way to stop the invasion was to grab his trusty rifle, a couple of cans of food, and hide in a tree all day shooting Russians in 6 feet of snow and 20 to 40 degrees below zero. Of course, when the Russians heard that dozens of their men were going down and that it was all one dude with a rifle, they got scared. He became known as the White Death because of his white camouflage outfit, and they actually mounted whole missions just to kill that one guy. They started by sending out a task force to find Haya and take him out. He killed them all. Then they tried getting another team of counter snipers, which were basically snipers that kill snipers, and sent them in to eliminate Haya. He killed all of them too. Over the course of 100 days, Haya killed 542 people with his rifle. He took out another 150 or so with his SMG, sending his credited kill count up to 705.
And can I actually pop in real quick?
Yeah.
I had actually watched a video documenting about this guy. Pretty much all of these rifle kills were done using, I believe it was a Mosin Nagant, but
Mm-hmm.
using iron sight
Yeah.
Yep.
because he believed that because he was like he didn't want the reflection off of the glass in order to give away his position, and pretty much all of these shots were from up in the mountains down into valleys in order to across to the other side. So this guy was iron sights, so basically his own personal eyesight taking out these groups of people.
Yeah. No scoping.
I just wanted to pop in and just say that because the fact of how yes, essentially, like just how amazing that fact is. Hell, I was when I was firing out like using my rifle at plus like after 100 yards, I was preferring like okay, I mean I can go just like my typical micro red dot, but let me use my +3 magnifier on here.
Uh, so continuing, since everyone they had was either too dead or too scared to go anywhere near him, the Russians just carpet bombed everywhere they thought he might be. Supposedly, they had the location right, and he actually got hit by a cloud of shrapnel that tore his coat up, but didn't actually hurt him because he's the fucking White Death, damn it. Finally, on March 6th, 1940, some lucky bastard shot Haya in the head with an exploding bullet. When some other soldiers found him and brought him back to base, he had half his head missing. The White Death, the White Death had finally been stopped for about a week. In spite of having come down with a nasty case, I can't help but laugh at this. In spite of having come down with a nasty case of shot in the face syndrome, he was still very much alive and regained consciousness on March 13th, the very day the war ended. The best Hollywood could come up with? Bob Lee Swagger, played by Mark Wahlberg from Shooter. In Shooter, Mark Wahlberg plays a reclusive, worn-out ex-sniper trying to escape the ghosts of his past. Bob Lee is called in by the FBI, who want to know if he, hypothetically, wanted to murder, let's say, the president, how he, hypothetically, would do it. They claim that he's the best there is because after years of training with long-distance shooting, he successfully killed 70 men in the desert with one of these. There's no pictures anymore because this is an old stinking article.
I
February of
remember watching that
2009.
movie.
Why it doesn't compare?
The,
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it was a very very cheesy movie. That I first saw it years ago. Like I was probably like uh maybe 13 years old, and even then I was watching it like wow, this is just kind of cheesy. Like they were very much you could tell it was just kind of a grab off of the Bourne series at the time. That was like the had recently just started coming out, and
Mm-hmm.
it was at the time like how now everybody's kind of trying to like go off of the John Wick series. Back
Mhm.
then it the Bourne series, and so they were very much trying to almost like do a cash in on that. In that they were like, "Oh, let's have this situation." It was very like just. Uh, I mean, it's entertaining if you can kind of like disassociate yourself from any like firearms knowledge, any like just knowledge in general, but really And that's really kind of the most I could say then. It was kind of a very much a bland movie, but and you could tell that it was very much not grounded in reality, and or at least if it had roots in reality, they had just Hollywooded it to all hell and back.
Yeah, pretty much.
I do have to say, I like your phrasing,
That's
if I just paraphrase it, of saying that it's a good movie if you can just distance yourself from knowledge in general.
yeah, I
A good
remember
way to put it.
I remember since high school I would have a joking saying like it makes sense if you don't think about it, which is
Yeah,
very much that movie.
that's all movies, because all movies have what we in the Trek circle like to call plot armor, or people who like Stargate like to call 5-minute miracles.
Yeah. Or at least all like mainstream movies. You know, the ones that cost a lot of money and thus people aren't willing to take much risk in not following basic formulas.
So uh, throughout the entire series of Stargate SG-1, there's always been plot armor for the main characters, but
Mhm.
a lot of times they pull off what my family came to dub 5-minute miracles. Like, just before the end of the episode, they would cut to a commercial and it looked like all hope was lost.
Mm.
And then they'd come back with 5 minutes left in the hour that the episode aired, and everything would resolve in those last 5 minutes. Call it
I
three and a
fucking remember
three and a
that
half.
shit.
And it was just, it was one of those things where it was a slow build up. Then you got to the half-hour mark, things got really tense, and like 5 minutes played out over the next half hour.
Mm.
Um, I I mean, there was an episode where Jack, Daniel, and Samantha all got these wrist braces that the Tok'ra put on them, and they went and invaded a Gould mothership to blow it up and steal a bunch of weapons grade Naquita. And all hope was lost because Carter got stuck behind one of the shields as the wrist brace stopped working. And right as the episode is about to end, the force field drops and everybody runs to the gate and everything's fine again.
Mm.
Okay, so the last one on Cracked's list, number 1, is Audie Murphy. And Audie Murphy is a very famous movie star in the U.S. actually. But here we go. Who was he? When Audie Murphy applied to the Marines in 1942, at the tender age of 16, he was 5'5" and weighed 110 pounds. So he was taller and weighed more than me when I joined the Marine Corps. They laughed in his face. So he applied to the Air Force, and they also laughed in his face. When he applied for the Army, they figured they could always use another grunt to absorb gunfire, so they let him in. He wasn't particularly good at it, and they actually tried to get him transferred to be a cook after he passed out halfway through training. He insisted that he wanted to fight through, so they sent him to the Maelstrom. During the invasion of Italy, he was promoted to corporal for his awesome shooting skills, and at the same time, he contracted malaria, which he had for almost the entire year, or almost the entire war. Try to remember that. He was sent into southern France in 1944. He encountered a German machine gun crew who pretended they were surrendering, then shot his best buddy. Murphy completely hulked out, killed everyone in the gun nest, then used their weaponry to kill every baddie in a 100-yard radius, including 2 more machine gun nests and a bunch of snipers. They gave him a Distinguished Service Cross and made him platoon commander, while everyone apologized profusely for calling him Shorty. About half a year later, his company was given the job of defending the Colmar Pocket, a critical region in France, even though all they had left was 19 guys out of the original 128 and a couple of M10 tank destroyers. The Germans showed up with a shitload of guys and half a dozen tanks. Since reinforcements weren't coming for a while, Murphy and his men hid in a trench and sent the M10s to go do the heavy lifting. And the tanks got ripped to shreds. Then, this 5.5-foot tall kid with malaria ran up to one of the crippled M10s, hopped in behind the 50 cal machine gun, and started killing everything in sight. Understand that the M10 was on fire and had a full tank of gas and was basically a death trap. He kept going for almost an hour until he was out of bullets, then walked back to his bewildered men as the M10 exploded in the background, Mad Max style. They gave him literally every medal they could, 33 in all, although he had doubles of a few, plus 5 from France and 1 from Belgium.
You sure you're not reading us like the Captain America reboot?
I'm sure, because Captain America would have been based on this guy. After the war, he came down with shell shock and was prescribed the antidepressant Placidil. When he became addicted to the drug rather than enter a program like some kind of sissy, he went cold turkey, locked himself in a motel room for a week,
God.
and got over it. He wrote an autobiography entitled To Hell and Back, and later became an actor. The best Hollywood could come up with, Audie Murphy from To Hell and Back. In To Hell and Back, Audie Murphy plays Audie Murphy, a badass war hero who proves his worth on the battlefield with his awesome badassery. The movie was the highest-grossing film Universal made, a record it held for 20 years until the making of Jaws. That's right, they actually needed a movie about a giant man-eating shark to top Audie Murphy's awesomeness. And why it doesn't compare? When some Hollywood producer wanted to make a movie based on Murphy's autobiography, he was determined to have Murphy play himself in the film. Murphy was afraid people would see the complete insane awesomeness the story had to offer and think he was embellishing or trying to cash in on his fame. So he actually had them take parts out for fear that they wouldn't be believable to a Hollywood audience. Seriously. So Audie Murphy played Audie Murphy in a less badass version of himself.
I gotta
A
respect
less
the man
badass.
for being like, these people just aren't gonna believe some of these things I did, so let's just take them out.
Yeah, exactly. And there's 3 more to the Cracked article. Alvin York.
Right, it's Alvin York.
He's a fun one.
Is he the guy who rushed a German machine gun encampment with a sword and in a kilt?
No, Alvin York is a Tennessee, or he was from Tennessee, and he actually had exit page, reload. He was a pacifist.
Right.
He took lots of prisoners, but he didn't kill anyone. Here, I'll read that one too. We got time.
All right.
Born to a family of redneck farmers from Tennessee, Alvin York spent much of his youth getting pissed drunk in bars and getting into crazy bar fights. When his friend got killed in one of the aforementioned bar fights, he swore off the liquor and became a pacifist. When he received his draft notice in 1917, York filed as a conscientious objector, but was denied. They shipped his ass out to basic training. About a year later, he was one of 17 men designated to sneak around and take out a fortified machine gun encampment guarding a German railroad. As they were approaching, the gunners spotted them and opened fire, tearing 9 of the men to pieces. The few survivors that didn't have enormous balls of steel ran away, leaving York standing there taking fire from 32 heavy machine gunners, as he said in his diary. I didn't have time to dodge behind a tree or dive into the bush. I didn't even have time to kneel or lie down. I had no time, no how, to do nothing but watch them, their German machine gunners, and give them the best I had. Every time I seed a German, I just touched them off. At first I was shooting from a prone position, that is, lying down, just like we often shoot at the targets in the shooting matches in the mountains of Tennessee. And it was just about the same distance, but the targets here were bigger. I just couldn't miss a German's head or body at that distance, and I didn't. Okay, so, correction. He did take lives, but he was supposed to be a pacifist.
Mhm.
After he killed the first 20 men or so, a German lieutenant got 5 guys together to try to take this guy from the side. York pulled out his Colt 45, which only had 8 bullets, and killed all of them with it. A practice he likened to shoot wild turkeys back at home. At this point, Lieutenant Paul Jürgen Vollmer yelled out over the noise asking if York was English. See, in World War I, no one really took the Americans very seriously, and everyone thought of them as the rookies. Vollmer figured his crazy, awesome, ballsy soldier must be some kind of English Superman who was showing these sissy Americans how it was done. When York said he was American, Vollmer replied, "Good Lord, if you won't shoot anymore, I will make them give up." 10 minutes later, 133 men came walking towards the remains of York's battalion. Lieutenant Woods, York's superior, at first thought it was a German counterattack until he saw York, who saluted and said, "Corporal York reports with prisoners, sir." When the stunned officer asked how many, York replied, "Honestly, Lieutenant, I don't know." And the best Hollywood could come up with. John Rambo from Rambo. Why it doesn't compare. Sure, Rambo takes on a huge chunk of the Vietnamese soldiers guarding a POW camp and slaughters them all, but that was a good 10 years after the war ended. It's not like they were expecting some guy to come charging into the camp mowing everybody down. York pulled his badassery off in the middle of a war while outnumbered every bit as badly as Rambo was, and York's the one who was a pacifist.
It's worth noting also that there's a really good Sabaton song about Alvin York called 82nd All the Way. And there's also a really good Sabaton song about Audie Murphy called Hell and Back. I'm willing to bet that there's a really good Sabaton song about each person in this list.
The one that you were thinking of that had the sword was Jack Churchill,
Ah, yes.
an Allied
Fucking
commander,
fighting-
commander in World War II and an avid fan of surfing. Captain Jack Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, aka Fighting Jack Churchill, aka Mad Jack, was basically the craziest motherfucker in the whole damn war. He volunteered for commando duty, not actually knowing what it entailed, but knowing that it sounded dangerous and therefore fun. He is best known for saying that any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed, and, in following with this, for carrying a sword into battle. In World War II, and not one of those sissy ceremonial things the Marines have. And we have 2 different swords. No, Jack carried a fucking claymore, and he used it too. He is credited with capturing a total of 42 Germans and a mortar squad in the middle of the night using only his sword. Churchill and his team were tasked with capturing a German fortification creatively called Point 622. Churchill took the lead, charging ahead of the group into the dark through the barbed wire and mines, pitching grenades as he went. Although his unit did their best to catch up, all but 6 of them were lost to silly things like death. Of those 6, half were wounded, and all any of them had left were pistols. Then a mortar shell swung in and killed, mortally wounded, everyone who wasn't Jack Churchill. When the Germans found him, he was playing Will Ye No Come Back Again on his bagpipes. Oh, we didn't mention that? He carried them right next to his big fucking sword. After being sent to a concentration camp, he got bored and left. Just walked out. They caught him again and sent him to a new camp. So he left again. After walking 150 miles with only a rusty can of onions for food, he was picked up by the Americans and sent back to Britain, where he demanded to be sent back into the field, only to find out with great disappointment the war had ended while he was on his way there. As he later said to his friends, if it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years.
It's amazing. It's one thing worth noting, though, that it seems this article left out. Very important detail. He was also wearing a kilt at the time.
Yes.
So this kilted man charging into machine gun nests with a fucking claymore. And playing on his bagpipes. Exceedingly based.
Yeah, can I just say, like, what is it? Both of these people that we've, no, the 3 of these people that we've gone over now, just all, like, the 3 of them just unfathomably based in just all of their actions.
Yeah.
I was shown this article back in 2010,
Mm-hmm.
not too long after I had gotten to my first unit, and I have never, ever forgotten about this since. Because it is some of the funniest yet most heroic shit I have ever heard of.
Who is the last person? Because I know we've gone through 4 of them, I believe.
Yeah, we've gone through 4.
Number 5 or number 1?
We didn't go over Yagendra Singh Yadav. And I'm going to go ahead and cut us off. Our audience can look this up on their own if they want. I will finish this in after hours.
What is the name of the article? Just so they know where to go.
It is 5 real-life soldiers who make Rambo look like a pussy.
Excellent.
Was published in 2009, and didn't you say that it was by like from Cracked?
Cracked. Yes, it was
Yeah,
a Cracked article.
Back when they used to be funny.
Yeah.
Alright, so we are going to go ahead and say goodnight for now to the live
Farewell,
audience.
Night.
And I will go ahead and start the music.
Do, do, do.